Hey everyone, this is Pete, and welcome back to Atari A to Z Flashback, a series of explorations of the 150 games that make up Atari Flashback Classics for Nintendo Switch. Today's game is Millipede for the Atari 2600. Now, Millipede was a 1982 arcade release by Ed Logg that we've previously seen on this series, and the 2600 port came out 2 years later in 1984. It was the work of one Dave Stalgus. I think that's how you pronounce his name anyway. This was a very well regarded port by the Atari community. If you look on Atari Mania today, there's several commenters on there who regard this as one of the best shooters on the system, and it's certainly a very good port despite its technical limitations and its simplistic graphics and sound. Now, interesting bit of trivia about this game. Apparently the phrase Dave Stalgus loves Beatrice Hablig is hidden in the code on 4 separate occasions for this game, and this same string can also be found in the code for the Atari ST's operating system as well. But sadly no historical record exists as to whether or not Beatrice Hablig also loved Dave Stalgus, so that is a mystery for the ages, I guess. Anyway, let's go play Millipede for the Atari 2600.
Okay, here we are once again with Atari Flashback Classics. This time taking a look at Millipede for the Atari 2600. Next time we'll be looking at Millipede for the Atari 5200. But yeah, today is the 2600 version, which actually did come out, unlike the 5200 version. So let's have a look. Here's the manual. Rid your garden of those bothersome bugs. An army of menacing millipedes, cousins of the famed centipede TM, have invaded your garden patch, and you must shoot arrows at them to rid your plot of these pesky pests. But wait, the millipedes aren't the only insidious insects you have to destroy. Jumping spiders, buzzing bees, bouncing beetles, mosquitoes, dragonflies, inchworms, and earwigs all have unique and deadly powers of their own. I'm disappointed. There's no overly elaborate story about an elf living in the forest. That's a pity. Yeah, this is the era where Atari 2600 games came with fairly pitiful manuals. It has to be said. Look at this. It's just a little leaflet basically. It's certainly a far cry from the ones you had back in the slightly earlier days. But then also, as a 1984 release, this would have been just after the whole video game crash. And so, particularly with Tramiel getting involved, there would have been a desire to save a bit of money, I think. But anyway, Millipede. You've probably seen this before. You're probably familiar with it already. We've seen the arcade version on this series already, certainly. But today we're going to play the Atari 2600 version. Are there game variations in this one? I forgot to check. Give me a moment. Getting started. Press the game select or fire button to select the number of points you want to begin with. Okay, so it's just like the arcade version where you can start with a particular number of points to basically increase the difficulty level a bit. Alright, so our options are, you can press game select to start with 0. Oh, you do it with the joystick, not the game select switch. So you can start at 15,000 or 30,000 points. And I believe the game gets harder at those score thresholds as well. So we'll start at 0 for now. And off we go. Now, as you can see... Whoops! Graphics-wise, this obviously is not a patch on the arcade version. But it's got all the elements that there needs to be. You have the millipede. You have the spider. You have annoying things flying down the screen. You have the DDT. You have the ladybugs. You have the horrendous noise when you get killed. You even have the torrent of whatever those are falling down the screen. And you can see the 2600 is actually keeping pace with the game remarkably well when you compare to some other similar efforts. I mean, even when you compare to the original Centipede, for one thing. If you look back at the 2600 version of Centipede, which we looked at a while back, you may recall that there was a fair amount of flicker on the sprites in that. But this is keeping a pretty consistent pace. It's throwing a lot around on the screen at once. It's Pretty damn impressive, actually. It's also quite difficult. I've always had pretty fond memories of Millipede. As I said back when we covered the arcade version of this, my mother was a big fan of this on the Atari ST. The Atari ST version came out much later. I think it was like 1986 or something like that. But it was a brilliant version on the Atari ST that my mother used to really enjoy playing. And she would always say that she would spend some time playing Millipede whenever the gentlemen of the Davison household, which was me, my father, and my brother, were getting a bit too much for her. She would go and blast away some bugs in Millipede, and that would make her feel much better. And I'm pretty sure she stands by that advice to this day. So yeah, she got really good at it at one point. Can't remember if she ever hit 1 million points, but that was certainly always the goal. That was certainly always her goal, was to try and score 1 million points, because that would make her feel better about whatever we'd done to piss her off that time. Oh no! Now, when people have reviewed this in the past, sort of one of the most common things that people express surprise about with Millipede is that the arcade original was, just like Centipede, was built around playing with a trackball. Oh my god. The arcade original, just like Centipede, was built around playing with a trackball. And as such, it was always going to be a challenge to adapt to the home computer formats, or the home console formats. Because although you could get trackballs for certain platforms, most notably the Atari 8-bit and the Atari 5200, and I believe the 5200 prototype was compatible with the trackball, trackball ownership was not something that developers could really rely on, so they needed to make the game play well with the joystick. And in fact, the 2600 version that we're playing here only supports the joystick. There is a trackball for the Atari 2600, but it's not amazing, from what I understand. Largely because there aren't really many games that are built for it. This certainly isn't one of them, for example. But that's fine, because this game was built to be perfectly playable with the joystick. And it is. It plays very well with the joystick. And in this Nintendo Switch version, what that means is that you can play very nicely with the lovely D-pads that you have on the Switch Pro controller. Or you can play with the analog stick if you prefer. Don't expect analog control, obviously, but you can play with the analog stick if you prefer that sort of feel for things. Alright, not bad. Let's try again. Now, interesting. Like, I just pressed the game reset button to start again there, and it put me at the 30,000 point mark rather than at 0, which is where I was trying to start before. So if I press game select starting score, 0, fire button, you start at 0. Let me just try something actually. If we power off and power on again, if you just press game reset, does it... No, it doesn't start you at 30,000 points by default. I wonder why that is then. I wonder if that's a bug. No pun intended. But anyway, yes. Yeah, it's always a pleasant surprise when the Atari 2600 version of something turns out to be one of the best versions. Because it's very easy to make the assumption that the 2600 version will be rubbish. because the Pro 2600 was very limited in its technical capabilities, as everyone knows. But then, as we see in games like this, there were people who were capable of wringing absolute majesty out of it. The amount of stuff this has going on screen at once is remarkable. I'm super impressed. Like I say, since we started playing, there has been a little bit of flicker, but certainly not to the same degree as we saw in Centipede. Right, if I press game reset now, yeah, it starts as a 30,000 points for some reason. Very strange. Oh well, I'm not going to complain too much. No! But yeah, it does mean you end up with amusing situations like the fact that the resolution of the Atari 2600 is too low to render the word DDT in the available space, and so it's just called DT now. Which is fun. But yeah, gameplay-wise, this is an absolutely excellent version of Millipede. Super impressed. Nah. Of course, you may well question why you would play this version on Atari Flashback Classics when the arcade version is also readily accessible on that collection as well, and the answer is just a matter of preference, I guess, and maybe a bit of variety. For some people, depending on how you grew up with these games, for some people there is more nostalgia for the Atari 2600 than there is for arcade games. I know certainly in my case, I have more nostalgia for Atari 8-bit versions of games than arcade versions of games in many cases. Because those are the versions I grew up with. I didn't have easy access to an arcade. As I've talked about on this series before, arcades in the UK aren't really a thing. Anywhere except seaside resorts. And so the experiences that sort of, say, Americans who grew up in the 80s and 90s talk about, where they could just pop down their local arcade and play Centipede for a few hours and try not to look at the weird men sitting in the corner. That's just not an experience that you could have in the UK because arcades were not a thing. And so certainly, for games like Centipede, Pac-Man, Dig Dug, all that sort of thing, I grew up with the Atari versions, and so I am more nostalgic for those versions than I am for the arcade original. And the same is almost certainly true for people who grew up with an Atari 2600. They would have played the Atari 2600 version much more than they would have played the arcade version. Largely because you buy the Atari 2600 version, you then don't have to keep feeding money into it, of course. For one thing. But also, it meant that those who did not live near an arcade, or did not have easy access to an arcade, or didn't have the money to spend on an arcade on a regular basis, they could have spent a lot more time with the home version of this game than they would have done with the arcade version. And so it's nice for this collection to provide you with the choice. As I say, the only version that is sadly missing is the Atari ST version, which was excellent. But also not really very well known because the Atari ST is the computer platform that an awful lot of people forgot about, sadly. Despite it being an early competitor for the Macintosh. And coming out quite a bit before the Amiga, I believe. but also the ST came out at sort of the height of the Tramiel years. And so that was a period when a lot of people started ditching Atari, including developers and publishers, just because they didn't like the way that Tramiel handled things. With perfectly good reason, because Tramiel was a bit of a twat, from what I understand. I have fairly vivid memories of the last few issues of Page 6 magazine, or New Atari User as it was known by that point. On every single one of those, the back page had a very unflattering picture of Jack Tramiel and some sort of sarcastic comment about how he wasn't supporting the Atari computers. And it just really summed up the sense of betrayal, I guess, that a lot of people felt at that period. Atari was such a powerhouse in the early days of video gaming and home computing. And to a lot of people, it just felt like Tramiel just threw that away. And the whole landscape could have been very, very different. But it wasn't. So it isn't. But that doesn't mean we can't enjoy lots of stuff from that era right now. And it's not as if Tramiel stopped absolutely every project that there was out there. So like this Atari 2600 version of Centipede would have come out while he was doing his evaluation period on the company, for example. The Atari 5200 version, which we're going to be looking at next time, didn't make it, unfortunately. The Atari 8-bit version did. Which is funny, because the Atari 8-bit version and the Atari 5200 version are pretty much identical. But Tramiel just decided, no, this Atari 5200 thing is stupid. And to be fair, there is a lot about the Atari 5200 that is stupid. Most notably its controller, and the fact that the whole thing is a horrific fire hazard. But aside from that, you know, it was a bit of a shame to see that machine kind of cancelled before it really had a chance to show its stuff. But anyway, we're getting off the point. We're talking about things we should be talking about next week. Today we should be focusing on the Atari 2600 version of Millipede, which is what we are playing right now. And as I say, it's a very good version that I'm very impressed with. Very playable as well. And aside from this version on Atari Flashback Classics, if you have the Evercade handheld from Blaze, which I'm a big fan of, this version is on the Atari Collection 2, I think it is. So you can enjoy one of the best versions of Millipede on the go, wherever you are. Or you can hook it up to your TV and play it on your TV. But if you've got Atari Flashback Classics, you can also do that with your Nintendo Switch as well. So, whatever. If you do not have a Nintendo Switch and you do not have a copy of Atari Flashback Classics, however, the Evercade is an eminently good way to enjoy some retro gaming. Not just from classic Atari games, but also from other classic 8 and 16-bit platforms as well. Yeah, I would like to do some more. Well, in fact, I would like to do any Evercade coverage here on YouTube. I do a lot of Evercade coverage on moegamer.net. So if you haven't stopped by there recently, if you check my menu bar at the top of the site, there is a dedicated Evercade section that is slowly, piece by piece, going through the launch lineup of cartridges, a game at a time, and doing a fairly detailed write-up on each one, including some history and a bit of information about how it plays. I've got a bunch of the original manuals there as well. So if you're looking for specific information on how to play one of those games, then you can check that out. And where original manuals have been archived online, I've provided some links to them. Sadly, that's not the case for every single game that is available on the Evercade, but most of them, and certainly all the more common ones like the Atari games. The instructions can be found fairly easily online. Right, one more go. One more go. Are you seeing why this game is so good now? Because while it does require skill and some strategy and careful gameplay and all that sort of thing, and observation and all the skills you'd expect from an arcade game, risk versus reward and all that good stuff, it is also just a game that you can just switch off your brain and enjoy in a really primal sort of way. Perhaps even while you're doing something else, such as recording a video and talking about your memories of classic Atari magazines and arcades that you couldn't go to and all that sort of thing. But yeah, this is a great version, and if you have Atari Flashback Classics, I suspect that this is one of the games that people would spend a pretty significant amount of time with, for one reason or another. It is tough. Be prepared for that. It is tough. But then what game from the classic Atari era of arcades was not monstrously tough, especially when you first start playing as well. Most of these games have that elusive, easy to learn, hard to master thing going on, where the actual rules of the game are very easy to learn, and the basic mechanics are easy to learn and understand. But it's just applying your knowledge of those mechanics and being able to make good use of them to score lots of points is where a lot of the long-term challenge comes from. And that's very much the case for this game. Like, although this is a more complex game than stuff like Space Invaders, it's still fundamentally pretty simple. But understanding things like how you should prioritize your targets and the best way of handling the various enemies and that sort of thing, all of that makes it a lot more advanced than that sort of thing. But at the same time, it is just a game where you move left, right, up and down and press the fire button. I said one more go, didn't I? This is really, genuinely, positively, definitely the last time. Let's see if we can get a vaguely respectable score. As with a lot of games of this type, a lot of success in this game is about not getting too greedy, not trying to do too much at once. Because, yeah, you can get yourself into a blind panic and try and kill as much stuff as possible, as quickly as possible, but you'll probably get yourself into trouble if you try and do that. Oh dear. It's not going well, boys and girls. Do not like those things. Are they dragonflies? Oh dear, that was stupid. I always rather like the fact that the mushroom field in Millipede moved up and down the screen. It sort of gave more of a sense that it was almost like a scrolling game. It was almost like you were going on a journey as you were playing. I'm unsatisfied with that game, so we're going to play just once more. Yeah, it just felt like you were sort of going on a journey as you were progressing, whereas Centipede felt quite static. like you were making a last stand against this centipede, whereas Millipede kind of advances and retreats as you play. It gives it a much more dynamic and interesting feel to me. It's one of the things I've always liked a lot more about Millipede over Centipede. It's a very subtle thing, but it really works in the game's favour, I think. Oh no! Yeah, I think those sequences there are some of the sort of most impressive stuff that they managed to wring out the 2600 for this game. Just how much stuff was moving on screen at once without any real trace of slowdown or sluggish controls or anything like that. It's, like I say, super impressive. Oh no! This is going even worse than last time. This one really will be the last go, though, because I think I'm reaching Millipede's burnout point. And my brain is just going, no, you can't shoot any more bugs. Your overall level of competence is about to fall through the floor. I'll tell a lie, there was a little bit of slowdown there, but it wasn't... It didn't make the game feel sluggish, it was just everything slowed down a little bit, so it almost felt like it was deliberate. A bit like you get slowdown in sort of a lot more modern shooters as well as a deliberate means of allowing you to get through certain situations. Anyway, that was Millipede for Atari 2600. Very good version that I'm going to be returning to very frequently, I think. Either on here or on my Evercade. So, we'll leave that there for today. As always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again next time.